Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome to OpenMicVO on this President's Day weekend. I think we're going to have a fairly small, intimate crowd tonight because it is a long weekend, but we're going to have some fun nonetheless. So really glad that you're here with us. Thanks. This event on Sunday evenings is about us getting together as a community to collaborate on problems that participants might pose to the group, just to share stories and knowledge. It's about us getting together as a community. Tonight, the topic is commercial voiceover. So any question, any comment, any story you might have with regards to performing commercial work, training for commercial work, commercial demos, getting how to go about getting commercial work, business development, anything like that is more than welcome. This group is all about being positive and supportive of each other. There's going to be participants tonight at all different levels of their careers. Some people are just beginning their career in voiceover. Some of us have been around for a little while. But everyone's a professional here tonight nonetheless, and let's make sure that we treat everybody with the level of professionalism and respect that they deserve. So those of you who are new to the voiceover community, I just want to assure you that there's no such thing as a silly question. Please go ahead and ask questions that you have, and we'll do our best to answer them. So the rules are simple. Please mute yourself if you're not actively participating in the conversation at that particular moment. In just a few seconds, I'm going to start unmuting people. Once you see you're unmuted, there's a little microphone icon in the lower left-hand corner of your Zoom meeting window. So just click that once and you're muted, click it again, and you are unmuted, and you're welcome to contribute to the conversation. Rule number 2, be nice to each other. Rule number 3, please remember that we are recording, and the recordings get posted to YouTube just in case there's someone here that wants to go back and have another listen to a particular topic that we discussed. And there are people that can't attend live on Sunday evenings that do want to catch up on what our discussion was about. And that's why we post to YouTube. So just remember that if you share any sort of information tonight, that it does kind of make it out onto the great wide internet, and I can't control very much about where it could end up. So let's get started. Once you see that I've unmuted you, please feel free to ask the first question, tell us the first story about commercial work. If you're not going to ask the first question, then please make sure to mute yourself in the lower left-hand corner of the Zoom meeting window, and that way we don't have any problems with background noise and dogs barking and things like that. So just starting to unmute people here. This process takes a minute or two. Sorry about that. Okay, so who has the first question for us tonight? Who has the first story they want to tell us about some commercial work that they've done recently? Who has produced a commercial demo recently that they're really proud of and want to tell us about the experience? Definitely want to hear from you. Also remember that you can always ask questions in the Q&A box, which you can access at the bottom of the Zoom meeting window. And there's also a chat feature if you have any information that you want to share with all of the attendees. Just make sure you click the all panelists and attendees in the two drop-down menu so that everybody gets a chance to see it, not just me. Just unmuting a few last people here. So who wants to get us started?
Well, Graham, thank you again so much for this. Is my audio okay?
Yeah, hi, William. How are you tonight?
I'm very good. Working on a lot of different projects here. kind of simultaneously, but this is fast becoming a significant part of my social life, is checking in with the VO community every Sunday with you guys. My question is this, I am a beginner, I'm studying with Edge Studio and so on, and I'm kind of on a narration track, and my main concern has been my time constraints because of my day job. Um, I, I'm going under the assumption that narration would be less deadline driven than commercial work. Is that true?
I think that's a fair assumption. Quite often, when you're doing commercial work, the client often wants to phone in to the session so that they can provide direction. And the deadlines tend to be shorter versus narration work, which tends to be more, here's my script, send me the files in the next couple of days. So yeah, I think that there's probably a little more flexibility in narration.
How rapidly do these things happen? I mean, if you are offered a job on a commercial demo, what's the turnaround time?
Uh, so if you audition for something and you win the job, and what's the typical turnaround time to get it to the client? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Well, I'm happy to have anyone else who wants to weigh in on this to please do so. My experience is usually the clients are expecting something later that day or the same or the next day. I mean, you're not going to have 4 or 5 days usually in order to turn around a commercial.
Right.
Uh,
Later that day, that would be quickly.
yeah, it often does happen that way, and that's when it becomes tricky when you're working full time 9 to 5. And I did that for a long time before I really jumped into voiceover full time. I was working a full time day job, and I was traveling a lot for that job as well. So it made it doubly difficult. So I certainly found it a whole lot easier to move my commercial work forward once I was working full time in the business. Anyone else have any thoughts on that with regards to how long you have in order to turn something around? Still unmuting a few people here. Okay, William. Well, that's the best I got on that question.
It's good. Well, I'm just going to plow ahead.
You
You
go.
said that you were traveling, and I know this is probably a little bit off topic, but did you record on the road?
I did. I carried around most of my work was in Chicago. So I actually had a bit of a portable kit that I left in the hotel I always stayed in Chicago. They were very nice to me. So they let me kind of store a couple of things there because I was in and out of that hotel so frequently. But I would carry around uh, like a Pelican case, like a plastic case that's waterproof. And I'd have my microphone in there and some cables and my audio interface. And I carried my laptop with me everywhere anyway. And I would build myself little forts out of pillows and comforters and ironing boards. And that's how I recorded frequently when I was on the road.
Yeah, I haven't been in a blanket fort since I was 9. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Whenever there's a voiceover conference, it's always funny because the housekeeping departments at the hotels that these conferences happen at, they just think we're all nuts because the first thing that happens whenever everybody checks in is all the voice actors call downstairs and they want an extra comforter delivered to their room. So that's the first thing that the housekeeping people find odd. Then the next thing is when they walk in to clean your room the next day, and what are these people doing? They've got their ironing boards on top of their desks, and they've got these giant comforter forts built. And what are they doing with this stuff? I'm sure it must look odd to the housekeeping people.
It's like a nomadic encampment.
Yeah, a bunch of gypsies here as we kind of pitch camp as we take over a hotel. Just making a couple notes here. Who else has got a question for us tonight? And of course, if anyone has any, it doesn't have to be a question. It can be a story you want to tell us about a recent commercial session you might have been in, and be curious to hear how that went.
Hi, Graham. It's Anthea. How are you?
Anthea, how are you tonight?
Great, great. Hey, I have a question for you regarding finding commercial work, to get an agent or not to get an agent. I'm just kind of curious on what would be the best route for this sort of thing.
I think that no matter what type of work it is that you're doing, whether it's narration or commercial or other types of voiceover work, is that having an agent's never going to be a bad idea. But certainly you don't have to have an agent in order to be successful in doing commercial work. In fact, in most cases, you're going to have to get some commercial work on your own before you're going to be able to attract the attention of an agent, just because agents want you to be good, but most importantly, they want to feel that you're going to make them money. And the best way to demonstrate to a prospective agent that you're going to be able to make them money is to demonstrate that you've already made money doing commercial work. So you're probably going to have to get some commercial work anyway. And that can be through a combination of your own networking with local studios, with local ad agencies, local production companies. It could also be work that you find and audition for on the online casting sites. A lot of new voice actors, that's where you kind of get started, is on voice123.com or perhaps voices.com. Those are the two large online casting sites. And there's lots of good jobs lurking around on those sites.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Some new people have been joining us. Just want to make sure that they're unmuted. Who else has a question tonight? We're talking about commercials, anything to do with commercials, whether it's performing them, having commercial demos produced. Maybe it's about getting commercial work, online casting sites. Any question that you might have is more than welcome. Unmuting people here still. There we go.
Hi, this is Anthea again. Can I ask another question?
Go right ahead. Absolutely.
I'm curious about, I've actually taken some voiceover training from someone who is in broadcasting. And he was telling me that there are differences between broadcasting and how you would work with a commercial. So my question is, what would the training difference between broadcasting and doing commercial work be? What are those things to watch out for when you're learning from a broadcast person? And what are the things that really make it different?
Wow, I know there's going to be some comments from the gallery on that one. I'm going to start picking on people. Stephen, I know you'll have some thoughts on that.
I hope you're talking about Cohen.
No, I'm talking about you, Mr. Gonzalez.
Oh, man. Well, thank you. My name is Stephen Gonzalez. I'm a voice talent from the Baton Rouge area. Basically, the commercials that voice talent generally do are not the same style as what you would hear sort of an in-house radio personality do. Yes, we need to fit about 45 seconds of text into 28.4 seconds, but it's not that. In fact, many people ask that we don't do this. Hey, this is what we're going to do. It's real high energy and all this stuff, darling, and all this stuff. It's unless it's a character. Generally, the commercials that we're going to be doing are just speaking to somebody about the product. The closest thing perhaps would be like a hardware salesperson at a mom and pop shop describing a hammer. You know, that's about that's about a normal sized delivery. Again, if you want to go for that high octane, if they want the high octane character, then by all means give it to them. It's what the client wants. But there have been many auditions that I've been through that the spec says no announcer, big capital letters, boldface underlined, all that stuff. So yeah, the typical in-house radio personality versus the regular commercial that voice talent do are quite different.
Yeah, Stephen, that's very true. And it's not just about energy. It's funny how when people have spent time in the broadcast business, and by broadcast, they're probably a radio announcer, or perhaps they're reading the news at a local radio station or a local TV station. It's funny, the energy level is always different because they often are talking like this, and they project. There's a lot of projection in broadcast versus often when we're doing our work, we're just kind of getting right up on the mic and speaking at a level that we would speak to as if we were, talking across the table from somebody. There's not that projection. Another big difference, it's funny how broadcast people tend to hit different words. They tend to emphasize different words in a sentence than what we would emphasize if we were just talking across the table from a friend.
Yeah, to lend credence to that, the word "and," for example.
Absolutely.
You hear that, but, voice talent is always taught never hit the word "and." It's like A and B. No. It's A and B.
Yeah. That's very much a broadcast thing where you're always hitting conjunctions. And it's a no-no. It's common in retail advertising and in broadcast type deliveries, but it's a real no-no in, kind of better commercial work. And that's one of the key ways to find someone who's done taken some good voiceover training from someone who hasn't and just has a good voice and is trying to break into the business, is because inevitably, as you say, it's this car is both economical and cost effective. It's bizarre how broadcast people hit different things.
Yeah, and the thing is also some clients want that. Like, for example, a car, they may want that A, B, and C, to let it be known that it's got everything. But that's really kind of like you said, you were talking to the microphone. Pretend that the microphone is somebody's ear. And, do you want to project in somebody's ear when you're trying to describe something that's of benefit for them, or you want to just speak like, we're doing now, and have them feel comfortable about the product?
Stephen, you just brought up probably the biggest difference between broadcasting and what we do is as voice actors, we're almost always talking to one person. There may be 20,000 people listening to an ad at any given time, but you're only talking to one of them at a time. Versus broadcasting, which by its very definition is broadcasting. It's speaking to thousands of people at once, and that requires a very different type of delivery. And that's where you get into these differences with regards to the amount of projection and things.
And in fact, I've also heard that people who are coming from either live stage or from commercial broadcast, they tend to have a little bit of a harder time adjusting to the tone, the energy, the speed, all that stuff for commercial delivery, because they're so used to that, that formulaic way of speaking. And, you'll hear natural, conversational, that type of thing all the time. And it's almost the antithesis of what they're used to doing.
Yeah, if I see on One More spec for a commercial that I'm auditioning for or I'm reading, no announcers, no announcers. We don't want anyone that sounds like an announcer. So what they're really saying is they want someone that sounds conversational and real versus someone that's putting on that broadcast persona.
I was just wondering if I could just jump in about the question of training, the difference in training.
Ladies and gentlemen, the infamous Carol Monda.
Wow, that's kind of sad.
It is.
And exciting.
Carol Monda, for those of you who don't know, is one of Edge's premier coaches, and she is a prolific audiobook narrator and does a fair amount of commercial work as well. So, Carol, we're honored to have you with us tonight.
Oh, it is an honor to be here. Really, it is. I love when I can spend a Sunday with you. So I was just going to say that generally speaking, you know, it's gotten to the point where we almost think of broadcasting as separate from most training because it's not even included in a lot of classes that you would find in voiceover studios. Usually, you know, you have animation or audiobook or narration or commercial, but very seldom do you have broadcast training. And I think that is because, number one, it's so very different. But I also think that because it's so much harder to get into broadcast, it seems a different path that you actually have to go to a broadcasting school. But that doesn't have to be the case. It's more just working with a coach who knows the difference and who can, you know, impart the difference. And the main difference to me is that, of course, I'm sure we've all heard this, that with commercial you're selling and with narration of any kind you're telling. But with broadcast, it's so true what Graham said about telling a large audience. You are casting to a broad audience, but it means that you aren't having the same kind of intimacy, that there is an urgency. Even if it's some kind of fluff piece in the news, it still is all about kind of bringing it forward and, you know, talking about that sweet dog who saved, you know, the girl's ice cream cone, you know. So I would say that the main differences are absolutely in delivery and the cadence of the delivery. There's, in addition to conjunctions, there are very interesting and odd, for the rest of the VO community, pauses. You know, and tonight we found that there was, you know, X, Y, Z. And even as the story continues, you know, even before it goes to a new story or a new broadcaster, there are things like, she said she didn't want that kind of treatment. You know, that sort of thing. There's a kind of drama almost in it. And this is also true of narration. Someone was asking before about, it was about the idea of how long it might take you and what the turnaround would be for commercials or narration. And I think it also does depend on the kind of narration. For example, you know, if it's a television show, usually you do have maybe a week or two before you hear if you've been booked, and then you have up to several months during which you're doing the actual job, maybe, you know, each episode 1 week at a time. Whereas, as you said, commercials are a little more of a quick turnaround. But even then, if you do have an agent, sometimes you're getting an audition a week or two before the shoot begins, or the recording session begins.
You know, Carol, the closest thing I can think of in the voiceover world to broadcast is live announce stuff.
Absolutely.
The people
Yes.
who were doing live announcing the Oscars and the Grammys and things like that. That is akin, I think, to broadcasting, but that's about the closest I can think of in the voiceover world.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's very close because again, the announce is not supposed to be all that intimate. Although you'll notice it's when they introduce, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 75th Grammy Awards. That sort of thing is very kind of broadcasty. But then when someone wins, it's almost like a wildlife narration, like. We're very close into the mic, and this person has won this many Grammys for those shows. So it's dual talents that you have to have, I think, in live announce. But yeah, that and as Stephen was talking about, sort of the hard sell commercials have a similar feel. There's more, much more drama and volume, but it's still that idea of I'm not talking to one person at all. I'm talking to all of you to come down to this car dealership,
Yeah.
Well, I have to say that Carol does have a very special place in my heart because she was my coach that got me through the commercial demo, and I actually flew to New York City, and she directed my demo. So it was very exceptionally wonderful experience there.
Yeah. And Carol did my audiobook narration demo. So she's wonderful to work with. Any of you looking for Carol, you can get a hold of her through Edge Studio, which is 888-323-EDGE. And Carol, you've got a direct email as well, do you not?
Yeah, I do. Coaching at carolmondavo.com. Yeah, I do private coaching. I also work for a Global Voice Acting Academy. So you can find me in any of those three milieu.
That's right. I'd forgotten that you were doing some coaching through the GVAA as well.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Carol. As always, your insights are invaluable. Much appreciated.
Oh, thanks. But I also have a question, if you would.
Please.
I'm wondering about these pay-to-play sites in terms of union work. Do you find that I know that there are fewer union gigs offered, but do you find that there are any, or what the percentage might be?
Does anybody want to jump in on that? This situation is very fluid right now because Voices.com purchased VoiceBank, which used to be where all the union jobs were.
Yep.
And now the union projects are being funneled through the Voices.com interface as well, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because the old voicebank.net internet site itself, the actual functioning of the internet site was horrible. It was, 10 years old and had barely been updated. So, but there certainly has been a lot of concern amongst the voiceover community with Voices.com, which doesn't have the most sterling of reputations in the business, having taken over the distribution of union breakdowns, because it's only going to be a matter of time before they start, wanting to put their fingers in the cookie jar, so to speak. They're going to want to start taking a transactional fee.
Yes. I was almost even surprised that you mentioned them, but of course we have to, even though it's a difficult thing here, working with at least the reputation of a complete lack of ethics and really extortion. And yet, if they're the only game in town for certain, a certain client pool, and they get people work, I find that really tricky to navigate.
Yeah, I don't think that they are the only game in town now, and I certainly don't think they're going to be the only game in town in the very near future, because there just is so much animosity directed towards Voices.com by the voiceover community generally, but SAG-AFTRA is, I think that Voices.com has kind of poked the sleeping lion, and because once SAG-AFTRA gets involved and they start putting some resources behind some sort of competitor, perhaps, to Voices.com's, incursion into the union area,
Right.
I think that we're going to see new players, or perhaps some increased competition from some of the smaller existing players if SAG-AFTRA was to throw some weight behind one or more of them. But Carol, to go back to your original question, Voices.com and Voice123 had both gone to SAG-AFTRA years ago and had wanted to work cooperatively with SAG-AFTRA to have union jobs posted through their websites. And SAG-AFTRA was completely unresponsive at the time. They just felt that the online casting sites were beneath them and weren't worthy of paying them much attention. So that has probably come back to bite them now.
Yes.
Because Voices.com, does have some substantial financial resources behind them. And, the big news was when they bought voicebank.net. It should be said that there's a fair amount of non-union work, narration work primarily, on Voices and Voice123, which may be posted as non-union jobs, but the rates are more than healthy enough to allow them to be converted to union, going through a fairly simple process with a paymaster.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that is absolutely true. So many people just read that and decide that's the end of the line. But you can negotiate so many of these contracts now just for one-offs and, special performance. They have all kinds of different categories and names for this kind of conversion. And I think too that even though it's very distressing to hear that there was no response from the union, I would imagine that the issue really came down to the fact that generally speaking, agents get union work for people. So agents are sort of, kind of tied to the union in some sense. And I don't know, maybe they felt responsible for keeping union work within the agency, the Uber venue of that organization. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. Carol, you and I have spoken about this before offline, where I think it's a shame that voiceover in general amongst SAG-AFTRA is treated as like the ugly stepchild, and has never really been taken that seriously by the executives at SAG-AFTRA. Mm-hmm. And certainly I don't think they ever took the threat from online casting sites very seriously until very recently. And let's just hope that their increased interest in online casting sites and the potential benefits that they could bring to union actors and the potential threats that they offer to the union community, that they start to wake up and take some real action. Because I think that much of even the higher end voiceover work, which has been almost exclusively union up until now, could be at jeopardy. Because it's quite common now to see on Voice123 there's a TV spot there for $5,000, and it's a national TV spot. Now, to a non-union actor, $5,000 for half an hour's work is darn good money.
Yeah, to any actor, I think.
But I think that we all know is that a national TV spot, if it's going to run for 13 weeks and its network is, I don't know, what would the rate on that be now? $20,000 perhaps?
I don't even know if it's up that high anymore. I mean, of course, it used to be so disproportionate to what it is now, but I would say probably 15.
Yeah. So that $5,000 payday, which looks pretty good to some of these non-union actors, and let's make it absolutely clear is that there are some really good non-union actors hanging out on Voice 123 and Voices.com.
Absolutely.
So when they're going to find someone of an appropriate talent level for a $5,000 posting. And that's scary because that was a $15,000 job last year when it was posted as a union job.
Absolutely. And there are other companies that are going directly to these pay-to-play sites and offering, the same kind of what all of us would think of as a pretty nice paycheck for an hour's worth of work or whatever. But I think that the whole world and the access through these kinds of, social media really ultimately is what it, I think, comes down to. It's just changing the face of everything. So in a way, unions may be in bigger trouble than they're at least talking about.
Well, certainly SAG-AFTRA in the area of voice acting they're either going to have to wake up and do something serious about it, or they're just going to have to walk away from the voiceover business and just concentrate on where 85% of their membership cares about anyway, and that's on camera work. So,
right. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for taking this time with me.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Carol. Always. I'm so glad that you're here with us tonight.
Me too.
Who else has a question for us tonight? We're talking about commercial work, anything to do with commercial work. And it can be, and if there's any of you online tonight who are new to the business, don't hesitate to ask like a newbie question. Believe me, we were all newbies once, and some of us not that long ago. So please feel free to ask any questions you might have about performing commercial work, about getting commercial work, where to go about finding commercial work. And maybe it's commercial demos, getting training for commercial work. Any of those questions are on the table tonight.
Hi, Graham. It's me again. Hi there. I'm still looking for my niche in this voiceover situation. And I was wondering, I asked the difference between broadcast versus commercial, and thank you all who, Carol and Mr. Gonzalez, thank you so much for all your input. And I'm also looking at what is the difference in training between commercial and book narration. I'm on my third audiobook, but I originally was training with someone for commercial, and I haven't trained yet for book narration. So I was just kind of curious as to what the differences would be and what I should be looking for if I decide to, actually I've talked to someone, so I'm thinking about doing audiobook narration work, but I just kind of want to know the differences.
Well, I'm going to throw that one immediately to Carol Monda because she is, again, one of Edge's busiest coaches when it comes to audiobook narration. And Carol, I can't think of anyone who could better talk about the differences between audiobook narration and more typical types of voiceover than you could.
Oh, I'm sure you're all sick of hearing my voice already. And by the way, thank you, Stephen. You're just so talented, and it's really great to work with you. So I just want to make sure you're asking the difference between many kinds of voiceover versus audiobook, or specifically commercial, or I thought you said narration. So could you just clarify the comparison you're asking for?
Just between basically commercial training versus audiobook narration.
Great. Okay. So
thank you.
Yeah. So again, mostly the impetus behind commercials is to encourage sales or usage. So like a product or service. Whereas the audiobook, its primary goal is to some extent entertain and or inform. And it's not asking anything of the audience. So that in itself is sort of a come from that that will tell you, what you might expect in training, but more specifically, audiobooks are stories, and while commercials can be little stories too, there is a kind of need to investigate and research the characters if it's a fiction, or the history, let's say, if it's about World War II. There's a lot of back work that we do, and then there's also a lot of text mapping or marking, and while that's true of all genres, with a book, think of the time that would take as well, just to mark for who's speaking in certain cases, and if it's hello, she said angrily, you kind of have to go, oh right, I need to know that it's angry before I speak. So those kinds of things, it's a little more meticulous. So the training has to do in many cases early on with those logistics. And then you get into the acting kind of issues of, not just who are these characters, but even how do you convey a visual, an imagistic scene that allows you to actually be there, in your imagination and in your gut. You want to enter every moment that these books unpack. And that's an acting thing. Acting just means, you're in a particular moment in a particular given circumstance. So it doesn't have to be as a person, it's still just that suspension of disbelief, So the overall, the commercial work, because it's so short, the training tends to be, again, more sales-based, which indicates and informs pace, volume, who the audience is, and the audiobooks much more focus on story, which is going to be a slower pace, a lower volume, and a little bit more of a human objective. I want to move this person or enlighten them.
Carol, tell us about what's required from you physically as a narrator when you're doing an audiobook. It's a marathon versus a sprint, like doing commercial work.
Yes, it really is. In fact, I will just tell this story because it's so recent and so painful. I just had a book that was like 350 pages, let's say, which isn't all that much, but just about every page had 4 to 7 words or phrases in French. And it took double the amount of time to record this piece. And this was at a studio. So I wasn't even doing the editing or anything, which I would not have done. I would have sent out, even if it cost me money, because it's just at some point physically, as Brand's asking, it's just too taxing. And also mentally, you do, I think, a more serviceable but not as exciting or evocative or deeply intuited job if you have to do the editing, if you don't have an engineer who has another pair of ears on the other side, whether it's in the moment or later when you send them files. So, yes, you're already thinking about the idea that it's going to take 2.5 hours to record an hour. I know people like to say 2 to 1, and there are people who can do that. I just don't know very many of them. But so if a book is 6 hours, that's at least 12 hours. But then, given the prep work before that, it's at least double that. So physically, you have to really, give yourself the space, and mentally, you have to allow yourself to really endure. It's like seeing, instead of a double feature, sometimes you're seeing a quadruple feature. You're sitting in that movie house for hours. The movie house being the booth, of course. So it's very tiring, and it means sleep, hydration, and exercise, i.e. Warm-ups, articulating things. Whereas, yeah, you want to warm up right before a commercial record, but I'm talking as an audiobook narrator, someone who at least 3 to 4 times a week is speaking for hours at a time. You want to really every single day rest and work in gentle ways, your voice.
Carol, do you find that your voice sounds the same at 3 o'clock in the afternoon that it did at 9:30 that morning?
No, I don't. And I'm very intrigued by the idea of, all of us have had to break, maybe not in the middle of a paragraph, but let's say at a chapter break or something. And so you have to kind of match, the level when you go in the next day or whatever. You want to start again and have it be like, oh, okay, that's the same person, the same, room tone. But it takes me a lot longer to match my level when I have recorded the day before in the afternoon versus, now it's the morning.
So there's a lot of considerations then when we're narrating something that is supposed to be listened to contiguously.
Right.
There's a lot that, you're probably more energetic first thing in the morning, and your voice sounds different first thing in the morning. And somehow you have to make it sound as if, this was recorded in one long session without any breaks. So people don't get a sense that, oh, obviously Carol just got up because she's a lot brighter, on chapters.
Right. Right. That's exactly right. And that, again, that brings in this idea of the technical side. It's sort of unfortunate that we have to think so much of those technical things. I mean, I shouldn't say unfortunate. I'm just saying that you don't have to think about that kind of thing so much with commercials. So it is just one more thing on the list that you tick off that is either time consuming or physically or mentally, fatiguing potentially.
Hey, Carol.
Yeah.
This is Gary Lewis from Jersey. Just a quick question. Audacity does not do well with narration. Could you tell me your favorite DAW for that?
Well, I hear that what you're really asking is what's good for punch and roll. Is that true? Versus
that would be correct.
Yeah. So if anyone doesn't know what that means, I'm just going to say quickly that Audacity, of course, will record, but it's called, in a sense, the continuous record. Sometimes it's not called that, but that's what we used to label it. And it simply means that you record everything, mistakes and all, and you edit it later in a different session, which has great advantage. But most people want to do what's called punch and roll, which means in the moment I'm recording, I make a mistake and I have to stop, kind of cue it just before I made that mistake or that sentence started, and go from there. So that in essence, you're editing as you go. So the DAWs that do that are Reaper, that have been suggested to me are Reaper, and I use Pro Tools, but that's because I'm old, and that used to be the only, it was not only the industry standard, it was the industry, what do they call a monopoly? Yeah.
Yeah, the nice thing about Reaper is that it can be really highly customized to suit us as voice actors, and it's inexpensive. You can buy a license for Reaper for, I think it's $60 or $70 versus Pro Tools, which is still like $400 or something like that.
Yeah, and Carol, this is James Romick in New Jersey. You should talk to Stephen about Reaper. Stephen and I are very good Reaper friends.
Oh, you are? I knew that.
Big Reaper devotees.
Are you? So maybe you could even help Gary.
I even teach. I've been teaching Reaper classes at the SAG-VO lab, and I'm waiting for you to do a class because I want to take your class again.
Oh, I would love that. I did. Why? Were you in my previous SAG-AFTRA class?
Yeah, I've done a couple of your SAG.
Aw, that's great. I would love to do that, and I will. Now you've inspired me. But yeah, I think that's great.
I'll even barter with you on Reaper classes for some VO training.
Okay, yes, absolutely. I'm not kidding, because I would love, Graham, I didn't know that they had sort of tailored, I know you can make a template for anyone using almost any DAW, but it sounds like this is a little more.
Oh no, Stephen and I have stripped it down specifically for VO. You should watch Stephen's YouTube videos.
Okay. Oh, great! This is great. I knew Stephen was doing that, but this is a great kick in the tush.
Yeah. And the other thing that I wanted to mention about commercials as opposed to audiobook kind of thing is Nancy Wolfson teaches something about recognizing patterns in commercial copy.
Yes.
And it's interpreting commercial copy, and there's a problem, there's an exposition, there's a solution, and there's a wrap-up, and sometimes a tag. So there are 4 or 5 different sections of a commercial piece of commercial copy. And once you recognize what those patterns are, you can take a piece of commercial copy and say, oh, here's the problem, here's the solution, here's the middle of it, and here's the wrap-up.
Yeah, so really commercials, unless you're doing like a 5-second tag or something, but I think you're absolutely right,
James.
James, thank you. I think you're absolutely right that, most commercials involve a certain amount of storytelling as well. Maybe not as much as a 350-page novel, but there is some storytelling in the commercial work as well. Stephen, I know that you're here. Do you want to jump in just for a second and once again give us the information on your incredibly valuable and free Reaper training videos on YouTube?
I appreciate that. Thank y'all. Everything I do is Steven Gonzalez VO. So except for Twitter, Twitter is Steve Gonzalez VO. For some reason, they don't let me put that in there.
Huh.
But YouTube, it's youtube.com/Steven Gonzalez VO. And right now I've got 2 playlists, each with 4 videos in it. I call it the fundamental sequence. And one playlist is for Windows, one playlist is for Mac. And it takes you all the way from downloading Reaper from Reaper.fm all the way to recording, saving, and rendering your first project within Reaper. And then right now, I've actually just uploaded yesterday a video on markers. And I'm letting some people take a look at it, just to see if it flows for them. And I'm working on the regions video right now, and also a sort of what I call reprogram your memory video, which people who come in from, say, Audacity, for example, they see the same thing in Reaper, but their brain is saying that it's something different from what they're really seeing. It looks the same, but it's not the same. And so I'm doing a video on that as well. But yeah, that you can expect by the time it's all over with, I'm looking at probably 45, maybe 50 videos overall.
And Stephen, you've given an incredible amount to the voiceover community with these training videos. If someone wants to send you a couple of bucks, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, basically you can, right now you can do it paypal.me/Steven Gonzalez VO if y'all want. Just give me a cup of coffee or whatever, as the saying goes. I'm looking at Patreon right now as well, setting that up, and I'll be making some announcements on that on the YouTube channel here when it's set up.
Good. Please let us know, Stephen, here at OpenMicVO when you've got your Patreon account set up, because
Awesome.
we'd like to help you. We know that you've spent countless hours putting these training videos together, and they're slick. I mean, this is not just some, schmo on YouTube, with crappy production values. You're putting a lot of effort into these.
Well, I appreciate it. And here's the irony. I'm using Reaper to do the video processing. So
Reaper is
because Reaper will handle video editing too.
Wow.
It's crazy. And it's just a little bit of crosstalk with Stephen. Stephen, did you get my file for the splicing in Roomtone?
I did. Nice.
I worked on that for her to get it right.
And I've been working on it too, but you beat me to the punch, so I'm going to use yours. I'm going to steal yours and use yours.
It works like a dream. It works like a dream. Anybody who does audiobooks and has to splice in a piece of Roomtone, and if you're using Reaper, this works so nicely.
Wow, this is so exciting.
Yeah.
And it's exciting not just for audiobook people, but I have to say, something else you said, James, about, you know, how Nancy Wolfson talks of the formula. I love the fact that all writing, it does follow to some degree a formula. It certainly all, each piece of copy or each book has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so it's just it's a microcosm working a commercial. So
yeah, well, it's one of those things where people who in VO who are at the top of their game doing commercials, I mean, somebody like Sarah Krieger, who you probably know very well. Who also teaches at the SAG VO lab.
Yes,
she can look at a piece of copy and just understand it in a second.
That's right.
Which it will take, you know, somebody who's not familiar with that kind of thing an afternoon to break it down.
That's right. Which is why it's always so good to just practice any kind of genre, because it's just going to open you up, and just for fun, it's so much more. I don't know. It feels like you're learning, but you're also enjoying, because there isn't, you know, there's no high stake of, oh, will I get the job? You know.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was interesting that we've been talking a bit about differences in training, but this one similarity, not just in training actually, but in doing, right, Graham? The idea that a commercial, it takes all of the same elements. It's just that they're done in different ways, but we all have to still address pace and transitional moments and, you know, mood and all of those kinds of things, energy.
Yeah, the thing that gets me is the turnaround, because I will see commercials that I've auditioned for like 2 days ago that are already on broadcast. You know, it's like, okay, didn't get that one.
Wow.
You know.
Oh.
Anyway, I have to go. See you, Graham.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, James.
Bye.
Anybody else have a question for us about, Randy's asking, Carol, can you please tell us what is this VO lab you guys are talking about?
Oh, okay. SAG-AFTRA in at least New York and LA has a voiceover lab. It's the Don LaFontaine one in California. And I think it used to be the Actors Fund VO Lab, but I think it's now just SAG-AFTRA VO Lab. And they offer free classes. They offer free space where you can record an audition for free. They also offer for free an hour of work, coaching work, or training in software recording with engineers from the area.
Fantastic. The key to note, though, is that in California, in the Los Angeles Don LaFontaine Voiceover Lab, you don't have to be a SAG-AFTRA member in order to be able to use it.
Oh.
You have to book in advance. You do have to go through a booking process, and you do have to get some training, but they will let you use it if you're not a member. As compared to New York, if those of you who are in New York, if you want to use the SAG-AFTRA lab there, you need to be a SAG-AFTRA member. Carol, Anthea's asking, what's your direct email address again?
Coaching, coaching at carolmondavo voiceover.com.
Fantastic.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Graham, I just posted the SAG-AFTRA EIF, the Entertainment Industry Foundation VO Lab link in the chat for us on the East Coast.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Appreciate that, William.
Yeah, EIF. That's great. Thank you.
And I just posted, I'm sorry, it's coach at Carol Mondavio, right? Not coaching.
Oh my gosh, is it?
Is it coach or coaching?
All right, let me check. I thought it was, wait, let me think. Yeah, I guess it is coach. You know, it's really scary and sad that I don't know that. Isn't it? You can also get me at carolmondacoaching@gmail. I know that for sure. But this is relatively new.
Okay, and carolmondavo@gmail?
Carol Monda Coaching at Gmail.
Coaching at Gmail.
Thank you.
Carol Monda Coaching at Gmail. Okay, so I put those all into the chat box. And we're out of time, folks. Carol, can't thank you enough for joining us tonight. It's
Oh my gosh.
great
Thank
getting
you, Carol.
some of your insights from one of the best coaches in the business. It's just
Oh,
Thank you
have you
very
in.
much.
you guys, thank you so much. I've learned also very much. So thank you.
Fantastic. So everybody, have a great week. Enjoy your day off tomorrow. I think most of you have tomorrow off as a